Cool. And let me shift some of my stuff over for making it a little bit easier to see as I start sharing my screen. Okay, so that should be comfortable for everybody to see. So does that look good for everybody as I get started here? Super. Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Bernie Maloney, like Sasha said, and this talk is from ruled by leaders to fueled by leaders, how to get twice the value with half the stress. Now, where Sasha has this running until 7 o'clock, this session is probably going to run about 45 to maybe 60 minutes. And I want to let you know there is going to be a Menti poll. So I've got a QR code up there. Get your phones out or your devices or like bring up a web browser. I've got the code to plug in. We're going to be doing that here in a moment. But to get us started first, okay, I'm going to take us all on a little trip. Okay. Sorry from the sunny beaches to I have this time machine. Now, unfortunately, the artist's portion of this time machine is not working. So it doesn't like move you through related dimensions in space. It only moves you through time. So come on, let's everybody get into this time machine. We're going to go back to the year 1800. Okay. So poof, you're exactly where you are on the face of the earth, and it's the year 1800. Let me ask you all a question. Can people fly from place to place uh, at will like birds can? No. Okay, cool. Okay, let's get back in the time machine again. The artist portion is broken. Okay, so that's not working. We're just going to stay in the same place where we are on the face of the earth, and we're coming back to 2025. Okay, let me ask y'all: can people fly from one place to another at will like birds can? Some of you are saying yes. Okay, what changed? Nothing about the laws of physics changed. Nothing at all. What changed was your mental model of what it meant for people to fly. And that's a big thing to keep in mind. So any system that you're going to be working with is going to have a little bit of inertia. That's what's illustrated on the left-hand side of this image. Tools, processes, practices like we implement in Agile, they're great, but they're often not enough to tip the system because people don't like change. They're very visible, but they're not as valuable. You got to reach further out. Great, we've got values and principles. You got to start changing a culture. Culture change is hard, y'all. Okay, I'm going to be giving you some clues on that. The further out you go, the less visible things get, but the more valuable they are. What you're really doing is you're changing mindset. Now, mindset is really squishy for a lot of organizations. But one of the things that I do, we're getting out there like with that mental model that we're talking about, is I work to start changing beliefs. See, people aren't going to change their behaviors until they believe something is possible. People aren't going to get in this big tube that has what look like wings on it and it's going to fly really in 1800 until they start having a belief that, yeah, that's actually going to work. Okay. Once you start changing people's beliefs, then you can start advocating for them to change their behaviors. Okay, so get ready because this is going to be fast paced. You're going to have a couple of sheets of paper to take notes, and I want to prep you for it. Okay, so draw a sheet of paper and have four quadrants in it because what we're going to be going through tonight are two different mental models, three eras, that's time frames of culture, four cultural norms, and five shift hacks that I'm going to hand you that you can use to help tip your teams to higher performance. Okay, so hopefully you got that Menti poll ready because now we're going to start working with poll. Okay, so to be sure that it's working, I've got a question up for y'all. Okay, um, do you prefer Star Wars or Star Trek? Okay, while that starts to load, and I'll come back to it in a second, this is where I get to introduce myself. And I'm trying to get Menti to work, and it's not. There we go. Okay, there's the slide with me. Hi, my name's Bernie Maloney. I've been practicing in Agile for, it is scary to say this, y'all, a quarter of a century. So I cut my teeth. I'm a mechanical engineer by training, and I cut my teeth in Agile in the consumer PC division at HP, starting back in 1997. Now, that far back, consumer PCs had a lot of sheet metal in them. They were desk side PCs. Sheet metal has about a 14-month lead time. Motherboards have about a 9-month lead time, but the shelf life of consumer PC is only about 3 months because Intel would change their roadmap every 3 months. Now, it's even more exciting than that because if you didn't get things into retail when you said you would, it wasn't like you missed 1 week of your addressable market. It was more like you missed 30% of your addressable market. So it did a little bit of time pressure. We did it with high mix. When I started, we were shipping 6 products a quarter. We grew to 20. By the time I left, after about 8 years, we were doing 200 products a quarter in Europe alone. Ooh, that implies distributed teams. Yeah, we had volume manufacturing in Asia. We had engineering here in the San Francisco Bay Area. We had go to market for Europe in Grenoble, France. So we did it with high volumes. Some of our products, particularly around Christmas time, would have over 100,000 units in a single model. Okay, so high volume, high mix, distributed teams, tight timelines. We also had tight margins. So most technology products, when I have a 20 to a 30% gross margin on a good day, we'd have an 8% gross margin. For some of those Christmas products, a 2% gross margin. We used to refer to it as we were shipping rotting bananas. Okay, and if we got it wrong, we'd need to staple 20 to $100 bills as discounts to move them all out because the next models were coming in, whether we liked them or not. They were already on a boat. So that's kind of my background in Agile. We ran that with weekly iterations of a plan, and everything we did maps to Scrum. So you'll find that I'm kind of a stone cold believer in this stuff. What I really do with my clients, okay, and I kind of lucked into that position, is I help them achieve breakthroughs in performance with their teams, with their organizations, sometimes even themselves. Okay, so let's go back and see. Cool, it's a 50-50 split. And at least 4 of you are participating. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to have a little interactivity as we go through here. So I got another Menti question for you, and I got to be sure that this is loading. It looks like it's loading on my slide. Let me be sure. Okay, let me go over to this slide and be sure that it's going to load here. Maybe I'm going to have to go further. This is where the technology plays with you. So, okay, I'm going to have to do this the old-fashioned way with thumb voting, and Doug is the only one who's on camera. Ugh. So, see, this is what happens when people are not on camera. Okay, Roman, thanks for turning your camera back on. Oh, and then it goes back off. So,
Sorry, I was chewing. Didn't want to do it in everyone's face.
okay, so let me ask you all a question. So the markets that you serve, would you say they're moving faster, thumbs up, slower, thumbs down, or about the same as they were, say, 10 years ago? What would y'all say? Faster, slower, about the same? Okay, faster. Super. The technology that you're using to serve those markets, would you say that that is moving faster, thumbs up, slower, thumbs down, or about the same as it was, say, a decade ago? Okay, yeah. With AI, Roman, good for you. Okay, it's about the same. Good for you. Okay, now when things are moving faster, okay, do they always move in a straight line? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. No, okay, okay. If they're moving faster and they're not moving in a straight line, does that make them easier, thumbs up, or harder, thumbs down to plan and predict? What would y'all say? Harder. But most organizations are still trying to plan and predict things, aren't they? Yeah, okay, I'm going to stop sharing to see if I can get my PowerPoint going again because, ooh, okay, it's like really stalled here. So hang on a second. Okay, we're going to do this and see if that works. I know it didn't work, so now Menti is working for me. Awesome. Okay, so we got the kind of the thumb votes in on that. Now it's not advancing. Ah, there we go. So y'all admitted that you know, plan and predict doesn't work too well, but most of our organizations are working that way, aren't they? Why is that?
It
Well,
feels comfortable.
here's my theory. See, their organizational model is that the system is a machine. So their whole mental model of the organizational system is that it's a mechanism. And mechanisms you can plan and predict. So this is something handy when I go into an organization. I kind of look at the age of the culture and the organization, and I find that there's three eras in the age of an organization. That's not the age of the people. That's not the age of the organization. It's the age of the culture of the organization. The first era is those organizations that were born before the internet, and that's a large majority of them. So think of finance, government, pharma, mining, manufacturing, all of them born before the internet. When things moved slowly, and you could plan and predict things. So the whole mental model of the system that era was built in, we can trace back to the 1830s with the Prussian model of education. So this is where we get desks lined up in nice, neat rows and people sitting there and getting the answer right. And it was designed originally to educate soldiers. And it was perfect for the industrial age where we wanted people to repeat recipes. So that whole industrial age was brought about in part by Frederick Winslow Taylor. So he did a lot of time and motion studies in factories, and he started to find the single best way of producing things. Because up until that era, most things were a craftsmanship model where people would work at it to their best. But he started looking for recipes and he published the principles of scientific management, and that helped the industrial age take off. Now, his thinking actually started to influence Sloan. So Sloan was eventually the GM and chairman, or sorry, the chairman of GM. And GM at that time in the early 20th century was really groundbreaking. If you go back and you do a history of the automotive industry, GM was super groundbreaking in the way that they were working. And they adopted some of those principles of scientific management to really grow their business. That caught on. Now, it didn't hurt that Sloan went on and founded the world's first, or funded the world's first university based executive education program at MIT. Ooh, so now we're starting to see it's kind of the dawn of the MBA. So these whole ideas started to influence a lot of management thinking throughout the 20th century. See, a lot of organizations use Agile really only in one dimension. Okay, they're only using it to speed up the machine. Build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn. Melissa Perry calls this the build trap. And there's like an unfortunate idea this is all about getting twice the work in half the time. Even that name implies we're going to speed up the machine. Okay. They're really focused only on using Agile in one dimension. As we go through this, you're actually going to find out that I talk about three dimensions of Agile. And just like as you remember your math, when you go from a linear to a square to a cube, whew, things get big and they get big really fast. So most organizations, they're just using Agile for delivery. See, most organizations with that mental model of the system being a mechanism, work was organized in silos. This made things easy to manage, easy to lead, and it gave us all a really clear skills growth path. And you'll hear things talked about as having governance layers. That's going to become important in a little bit. So what happened is Agile come in, and initially I was like, let's speed things up. And we've all seen this as Agilists, where people are just speeding up the individual parts of the machine, and then there's a whole bunch of handoffs, and it's not working too well. Okay, so now let's get into the second era. These are organizations where their culture was born in the internet, but not in the cloud. So a couple of examples out of Silicon Valley here. Think of Cisco and PayPal. They do a little bit better, but they still struggle with this whole agile idea. So they haven't really gotten that mental model out. Now, some of the adaptations that were made is, yeah, let's break work down into cross-functional teams and get that sped up. But you still hear this talk about governance layers. Okay. So now that gets sped up as well, and we've still got some handoffs. Now let's talk about the third era. These are organizations where their culture was born in the cloud. These are organizations born after about the Agile Manifesto, after about the year 2000, where we already had started to discover these new ways of working, and they're almost natively Agile. So here in the Bay Area, if you think about organizations like Stripe and Square, their culture was founded already with some of these principles, and they really already operate in this way. See, they've already started to make the shift from the whole idea of being ruled by leaders in plan and predict to fueled by leaders in sense and respond. They've got a different mental model of the organizational system. They've shifted it from the mental model of the system being a mechanism to instead the mental model of the organizational system being an ecosystem or an organism. And instead of planning and predicting, you can sense and respond to that. Now, the whole key question is how do you start to navigate that shift from plan and predict to sense and respond? So let's go back to Virginia Satir's change model. Most people are much more familiar with Bruce Tuckman's stages of team development and the whole idea of forming, storming, norming, and performing. Fits really well on Virginia's curve. I prefer the curve that Virginia drew because pictures are worth 1,000 words. Now, something to know is when change occurs, Virginia used to call it, a foreign element enters, and then things descend into chaos. People don't like chaos. And so what they typically want to do is they want to retreat to their old way of working. This is why like people keep retreating back to that plan and predict and that machine mentality. Instead of pressing through what Seth Godin talks about as the dip to get to that new level of performance, as they get to what Virginia called the transformative idea, that's the storming to norming, okay, and to the new status quo, the performing that Bruce talked about. So one of the things you can do, okay, to make the change possible is start to shift the culture. Now, changing a culture is hard. So we're getting a little bit further out on that lever. But if you talk to anthropologists, it's really well established that if you start changing a language, that starts changing a culture. If you look at what's going on in the eastern part of Ukraine right now, in a large part, that whole war that's going on has some elements of what language is going to be spoken in that part of the world. So, one of the things you can do to start changing those beliefs and start changing that mental model is start shifting the language from the language of mechanisms to the language of organisms. Okay, let's see if my Menti is working now. So, pull out that Menti. Okay, and does your organization use words like, and this should be a select many, words like efficiency or effectiveness or resources instead of people? Let's see what y'all say. Welcome, Olaf. Thanks for joining.
Not working for me.
Okay, sorry. You know,
Oh, there we go. Loaded.
cool. Okay, so I'll let people go ahead and respond to that. 2 out of 5 of you have had a chance. 3.
Yeah, I'm pressing submit and it's not submitting.
Okay.
Go. Okay, now.
Technology already works perfectly for us. Okay, so do you recognize those are words that are all about the language of mechanisms? Efficiency, effectiveness, resources, like turning people into objects. So, one of the things you can do to help shift an organization from the mental model of a mechanism to a mental model of an organism or an ecosystem is start shifting the language from efficiency to effectiveness, from metrics to diagnostics, from resources to people, from people being human doings to people being human beings instead. Okay, so now let's see where my Menti goes on this because I don't have things. This is a word cloud, but you all can shout it out instead. Can you think of any other mechanism like words that occur in your organization? So, one that I thought of as I was reviewing and prepping for this is the whole idea of governance layers. I
Mhm.
mean, machines are governed. Yeah, human beings might be governed a little bit. Okay, looks like y'all are typing things in, but it's having a hard time responding to things. Okay. So instead of governance layers, okay, I tend to think of things as looking for support layers or support pillars is even better because support, that's more like a organism or an ecosystem. So you can start thinking about this language. In fact, one of the things you want to do is be curious, not judgmental. So think about it. The whole mechanism mentality is very judgmental. Did we get it right? Are we being efficient? Are we using that capacity to its fullest? Versus curiosity is all about exploration versus exploitation. So getting curious instead of judgmental really helps. Okay, now for most executives, I want to let you know fail is a four-letter F word. If you're here in the Valley, I don't know where everybody is, but if you're here in the Valley, you've probably heard the fail fast or move fast and break things. I like to tell people that, look, fail is a four-letter F word for most executives. You're going to want to reframe that. But it's really important for this stuff to work. So one of the references I want to bring to your attention is Amy Edmondson's Right Kind of Wrong. Now, Amy was behind the research that really established psychological safety. Right Kind of Wrong is really beautiful. Amy's research is largely in the medical sciences. And the whole idea of psychological safety came from her research of why were some care teams getting better results than others. And the puzzling thing that she found was the care teams that were getting better results actually reported more errors. She went and investigated, and what she found was they were psychologically safe to report the errors, so they were able to squeeze them out of the system. Now, this book, Right Kind of Wrong, is all about making failures. And one of the things Amy points out is there's three common failure types. There's basic failures, which those happen usually because there's inattention or neglect, because there's a high predictability about things. There's complex failures. Now, those are the classic chain of failures type events. In medical science, Amy reports a lot of administrators will have a block of Swiss cheese that's plastic, it's not actually cheese, on their desks because it's the whole idea of all the holes have to line up for the actual error to occur. So it's a big mental reminder of it. Complex failures can often come where a system is overconstrained and like chain of event failures that complex failures fly into. This is literally the one thing happened, another thing happened, and then the plane falls out of the sky. Okay, intelligent failures, on the other hand, those happen too. They happen really often in pharma. If you talk to anybody who's in pharma, probably 70 to 90% of the experiments that they run, they expect to fail because they're exploring things versus exploiting things. Now, let me come back to the whole complex failures. Okay, so Amy tells a great story out of Boeing. Boeing had a terrific safety record through the 1990s, and Boeing's culture was very much engineering driven. The folks in the executive suite all came from an engineering background. There was a high degree of communication between the executives and the line workers in engineering. They had a terrific safety record. In the late 90s, they merged with McDonnell Douglas. Now, McDonnell Douglas, their executive team, came from more of a finance background. Okay. Eventually, in the merged company, they moved headquarters from Boeing close to the workers to Chicago to be close to the customers. United was one of their big customers, and that's where United's headquarters were. And really, that leadership team took over more from a financial perspective. Now, through the late 2000s, Airbus came out of the blue with, I think it was the A320 as a model. Woo, this was a revolution in the capacity of a plane, and Boeing knew they needed to compete. And this is where the 737 MAX comes from. And if you go research some of the history of the 737 MAX, there was an awful lot of pressure put on the workers to cut corners on some of the things. And Boeing eventually was found guilty of some of this stuff. But because they cut some of those corners to compete with Airbus, okay, because they over-constrained the system, that's where you get in 2018 and 2019, two separate 737 MAXs falling out of the sky. And in 2024, another door plug blowing off over Oregon. See, most organizations with that mental model of a system being a mechanism when they get into complex things, they really try and over constrain the overall system. They try and govern it. And when you think about it, for financial people, this stuff is just numbers. It's not an organism, it's a mechanism. Just change the numbers. So, this is something that you want to think about. Is you want to start encouraging an organization to make intelligent failures. I got a whole other talk on that based on that experience at HP. Olaf was there for part of it, where there was a philosophy of make new mistakes because it was a really tight system. So this is one of the things you want to make your organization aware of is these mental models and the over constraint when you come from that mechanistic sort of thinking. Now, another thing I want to point out to you is research from the Business Agility Institute. I have to disclose my spouse is the current CEO of BAI. They research a lot of high performing organizations all around the world. And what they have found is for the whole enterprise to really be agile, there's over 80 different behaviors that they've grouped into 18 different capabilities across 5 domains. And one of the things their research shows is only about half of those behaviors apply to followers. All of them apply to leaders. This is the key thing that's holding things back is leadership thinking and that mental model of the system being a mechanism and governing it that way. So you want to get out of that one dimension of Agile, of the whole build, measure, learn, build trap, of just applying Agile for delivery and thinking it's all about twice the work in half the time. Instead, you want to start expanding that model from just delivery to also thinking about discovery. Now, this Mobius loop comes from Gabby Benefield, who's out of the UK. And the whole idea of the right-hand half of the Mobius loop, that's what a lot of organizations think about, is that one dimension of Agile. Build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn, about exploiting a known idea. But the left-hand half, this is really what product owners do, is exploration of what's the problem to solve and ways to solve the problem. See, most organizations just give their teams solutions to build rather than problems to solve. This is a huge change for an organization. And it starts to get to what I teased you with of 3 dimensions of Agile. So many organizations, they really only use Agile for how to build. They're really only focused on outputs. And I call that delivery agility. Okay, there's another dimension to Agile, which is all about how do we go about solving problems. And we hear about this a lot in Agile, which is all about focusing on outcomes rather than outputs. And I refer to this dimension as outcome agility. But there's really a third dimension to Agile, and that's really all about what are problems worth solving. This is all about the impact that we're going to have, and I call this strategic or business agility. Now, this is the way, that first dimension, that second dimension, that third dimension, this is the way that startups work. Startups start out with, is this a problem worth solving? If it's not, okay, they don't get another funding round. If it is a problem worth solving, great. What are the ways of solving the problem? Okay, if it's not a solvable problem, great. Okay, they don't get the funding for the next round and to go build out. This is the way you want to start encouraging organizations to work. Is this a problem worth solving? Is this, let's explore the ways to solve the problem instead of just going out, build, measure, learn, twice the work in half the time. You want to shift people's beliefs about what's possible, because as you start to shift those beliefs the same way that I shifted yours with our whole time machine experiment, they're going to be willing to start to shift their behaviors into some of these new patterns. So here's another hack you can use. Now, this one comes, okay, out of a book by a guy named Andrew McAfee. He's a professor of business at MIT these days, and he got very curious about why companies on the West Coast were so good at generating market capitalization. So what he did is he went back and he studied them. Now, this is a plot of the top 100 companies by market capitalization in the United States. The location is where their headquarters are as a rough proxy for the company on the West Coast or the rest of the United States. The size of the circle is the amount of market capitalization. The shading on the circle is the age of the organization. More faded is older. And if there's a solid circle around it, okay, that's a high tech company. So you can see in the lower right, you can see a solid circle. That's IBM. Now, this is a snapshot in 2002. Okay. Here's a snapshot in 2022. Here's a snapshot in 2023. Let me ask you, would your organizations like growth like this? Yeah, you know they would. Now, he dug into this and he found it wasn't that these companies were high tech. What he found is there are actually four cultural norms that lead to extraordinary results. One, science, the willingness to run experiments. Oh my gosh, like we talked about with Amy. Ownership, you want to reduce the red tape. You want to actually have the teams making decisions. Speed. Now, most organizations with that mental model of the system being a mechanism, they hear speed and they think this means just turn the crank faster, turn the crank faster, turn the crank faster. He makes the point it's not about speed of execution, it's about speed of learning. And it takes things from lying about we're on track, watermelon indicators, which all of us have seen, green on the outside, green on the outside, green on the outside, red on the inside. Okay, from lying to learning. Okay, and openness, the ability to challenge the status quo. See, most organizations, when you think about those three dimensions, most organizations, the discovery is done by the executives and then it's tossed over the wall to teams for execution and delivery versus the teams really being involved in, how to solve the problems. Now, an interesting aside that I can inject here, particularly about speed, comes from a story that I heard at another meetup out of Pivotal. So the US Air Force wanted to kind of figure out how they could leverage the success of Silicon Valley. So they started an incubator here to solve problems. And the folks in the incubator went looking for problems to solve, and they found one in tanker refueling. At the time, tanker refueling was managed in a small room in the Middle East. On one side of the room, they had a computer that was talking to all of the fighters. And on the other side of the room, they had another computer that was talking to all of the tankers. And so it was a supply demand match, okay, between needs and availability. And they would literally write things on magnetic pucks and move them across a whiteboard. So they found this was a problem that, yeah, they could probably go and automate. So the traditional government contractors had been working on this for a couple of years and hadn't made any progress. And within 6 months, they were saving the US government $750,000 a day because they weren't having to do tanker scrambles. That caught the attention of Congress. John McCain was still alive and was the head of the Senate committee in charge of military funding. And they had a hearing, and Congress decided to defund the government contractors and said, okay, y'all need to work in this fashion. Now, I got to hear a talk from the head of Pivotal before this came out in public. And one of the things he said is what you want to do is you want to optimize for learning. Whenever you're setting things up, you want to optimize for learning. And that's echoed in Andrew McAfee's research. Now, link in the slide that I've got here, he gave a talk at the Computer History Museum in December 2023, which is where I took those pictures. It's a great talk. It's worth going and watching the first 15 minutes of it to hear him tell the story of it directly. Okay, so cool. Now, as we start to get into this third era, there's still that echo of systems being mechanisms. We've maybe got cross-functional teams that are working on things, but we got that whole governance layer that's there. And one of the things that you want to do is you want to shift it from a governance layer to being support pillars. See, a lot of project management is all about like, what's the scope? What's the schedule? What's the budget? Any business has layers like finance, legal, and human relations. Think about it. Why does an organization have human relations? Frankly, it's to keep the organization from getting sued. Why do they have finance? Well, we've got financial reporting laws. Why do we have legal? Well, duh, legal. Notice the defensive mentality that's there. And a lot of project management is, hey, what's our accrued value? That's a finance question. What's our staffing? Okay, that's an HR question. What's our statement of work? That's that's a legal question. So a lot of the way that projects get run have this mechanistic governance way of operating things versus a more organic and ecosystem way. So that's why I like to talk about shifting this from governance layers to support pillars. Okay, so now I'm going to check with y'all. Have you all ever seen the task switching exercise? So take out a sheet of paper, okay, and draw three columns on it. Okay, now it doesn't have to be a sheet of paper. If you use a tablet, tablets work just fine. Label the first column 1 through 10, the second column A through J, and the third column I through X. What we're going to do is we're going to run an experiment to kind of illustrate some of these principles. Okay, don't start because I'm going to do this as a timed experiment. Now, you're going to fill in all 10 entries across all three columns. Don't start. Okay, you're going to do it by going across the page. Okay, across the page. Don't start. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to time first person to complete, half the group to complete, and all of the group to complete. Now, with so many of you with your cameras off, this is going to be hard for me to do. So I'm not going to really do this. I'm going to show you results. But you can imagine like what it takes to kind of fill things in as you go across. Yes? Okay, so
Just
that's
to
the,
clarify, when
yeah,
you say across, do you mean do one, do A, do I, do two, do B, like that? Or what do you mean?
correct. Correct.
Okay.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean when I say going across as you fill them out. Okay, so that's the first pass that you make. We're not going to run it because I got most of you with your cameras off, and it's really hard for me to take the data. That's okay. I've got some stuff that can substitute. So then you run a second pass. Same three columns, same order. Okay. So this time people go down the column as they fill things in. Now let me give you a hint. If you ever run this in real life, one thing you got to coach people, don't start. People are really competitive. They want to win, they want to get this thing filled in, but you're trying to take data. It's not a competition. This is actually data collection. It doesn't matter if you do this way going down, okay, first, or if you do this way going across first. It doesn't matter. Okay, you'll get the same results. It doesn't matter what the order of columns is between the two passes. It does matter that they're the same order. That's it. Now, when you do that, and I do this very regularly, and so I get the data, what you're usually going to find is all of the work gets completed in about or less than the time that only half the work got completed when you went across. Now, open question for the group. How is going across like real life work as you experience it?
Handoffs,
Yeah, indeed.
Emails, Slack all day.
context switching.
Context switching, indeed. Do any of y'all have to multitask, work on multiple projects at the same time? Yeah, what you're illustrating right here with this experiment that's very repeatable. I've got data if anybody wants to see it. Okay, and I have data where it blows out and it doesn't fit this pattern, so it's the exceptions that prove the rule. But you're going to routinely find that all of the people complete in when you go down the columns in about the same or often less than the time that it took for only half the people to complete when you go across. Then I ask people on a fist to five basis, how is your stress level? Five is high, fist is low when you go across. And how is your stress level when you go down, fist to five? They notice that their stress value, their stress level was less. So this illustrates that you can get twice the value with half the stress. Let me ask y'all, yes, thumbs up, no, thumbs down, or maybe so. Does your management really care how hard you work? Okay. Or do they, okay, Doug works for slave drivers. Or do they care, or do they care how much value you produce? Yeah. Okay. So you want to focus people on producing value, not just operating efficiently at full capacity like a machine. You want to get them to operate effectively like an organism. Think of that language, the language of mechanisms versus organisms. So let me ask you, when you go to your doctor, do you go for an efficient treatment or an effective treatment? Huh? Okay. Do you get blood metrics run or blood diagnostics run? Yeah, you can start thinking about this as you're starting to try and shift the organization, to shift the language from the language of machines to the language of organisms or ecosystems. Okay, so did everybody catch all the hints that I teased you with? The 2 mental models, the 3 eras of culture, the 4 cultural norms, and the 5 shift hacks that I've already presented to you. Okay. Let me ask y'all, show of hands, how many of you identify that your culture is born before the internet? Has the whole idea of system as a mechanism. Cool. Olaf, I've got examples out of your field of organizations where they were truly born before the internet, but they're in your field and they're really operating like they're in the cloud. BAI has done some studies on them. They're really impressive. Anybody like have an organization where you were born in the internet but not the cloud? Anybody have the benefit of kind of that whole culture that's born in the cloud? Yeah, Sasha was telling me about the place he's working these days. Doug, your hand is still up. I don't know if you had a question.
Oh,
Okay.
oops. It was an accident. I was just about to say what I've seen, at least in my recent places, is that the organization's nature changes as the leadership changes, depending upon who you bring in and where their background is from, right?
Very, very much. Um, so I told you about my background at HP. When I joined that division, somebody told me you'd be surprised what the difference of the person at the top makes. And I was like, yeah, right. Oh my gosh, they were so absolutely right. The top end, this is why I pointed you to that research from BAI. It's really all about leadership behaviors sets the culture. And if you can start shifting the culture, you got a big lever. But to do that, you got to start shifting the beliefs about what's possible. So let me tell you a story. The prior division that I was at in HP, the general manager literally went to my church. And it's a small church. It maybe holds a couple hundred people. And I would bump into him on the way out of church on occasion. And I could tell Charlie didn't know my name, even though we went to the same church, we worked in the same building, and it wasn't a big division. So then I went to the division that I told you about at HP. So still at HP, still within the bigger corporate culture. And within about my first month, certainly, I think it was even my first 2 weeks, I came around a blind corner. And there was the GM of this division. His name's Webb McKinney. Webb is my hero to this day. Okay. And there was only about 8 feet between us as I came around the corner. And Webb said, "Hi, Bernie." I was blown away. So Maslow's hierarchy, personal recognition. Here's a guy who'd taken the time to learn my name inside of the first 2 weeks, where the prior GM, I'd worked there for a couple of years and he still didn't know my name. Oh boy. And like I said, that division in a fast moving environment had an ethos of make new mistakes. I can tell you the story about the weekend that I blew $1 million of HP's money and I was forgiven because they had that ethos of make new mistakes. So culture really does make a big difference. And really, it's the people at the top. That's why a lot of my practice is focused on product owners, product managers, and leaders. Cool. Any other observations before I kind of move to close this out with a summary? Let me check. Did all of you catch all of the things that I laid down before, like I put up the summary slide? Olaf, probably not you because you didn't see that this was coming. Okay. That was a plant to get everybody to pay attention as we go through. Okay. So what you're really doing is you want to start shifting the mental model of a system from being a mechanism to being an organism or an ecosystem. And Agile's real leverage is in the mental model. Now, those mechanistic cultures, they hate the whole Agile, Agile is a mindset because it's very squishy and you can't plan and predict squishy stuff. So one of the things I do is I start shifting beliefs about what's possible with some of the hacks that you've seen here in this talk. The whole idea of the time machine, the whole idea of faster or slower, okay? The whole idea of language shifting, that task switching exercise that we did, as well as just show them the bubbles and the four cultural norms. So let me ask you sincerely, compared to when we started this talk, do you believe more is possible? Yes, no, or maybe so? Okay. Usually when I do that, I get some people who are like, yeah, okay. See, once you start shifting people's beliefs, now you've earned the right to advocate that they start shifting their behaviors as well. The further out you go, the more leverage, even though the less visibility. But this is what you got to do to have a breakthrough to an impactful organization. You can shift the language from the language of human doings to the language of human beings. From people being cogs in a machine, okay, to people being people. You can start to shift the mentality from Agile just being there to turn the crank faster on delivery and just giving your team solutions to build. Instead, start giving your teams problems to solve. Think of the user story format. That's just a problem to solve instead of a solution to build. Because it starts to open up your team's idea about ways to solve the problem. You really want to start stretching the organization out of thinking of Agile in one dimension. And all of us as Agilists, we talk about outcomes and outputs. I'm going to challenge you to start thinking about impact as well and start framing this up. And is this a problem worth solving? Are there different ways of solving this problem before everybody starts jumping into outputs and delivering things? So thank you very much for your time and attention. Okay, my name's Bernie Maloney. What I really do with organizations, I help them make breakthroughs in performance with their teams, with their organizations, and even themselves. Let me ask you all, how many of you are eager for a performance breakthrough to become an organization that is fueled by leaders rather than ruled by leaders? Yeah, okay, cool. That's what I've got for y'all.